had a plan for today. That plan usually involves standing in front of groups like this and talking at people. We get really good at this in academia. In the ivory tower, we stand up, we educate, we tell you everything we know. I might change this up a bit, so we'll see if or what slides I get through. I think it would be such a better use of everyone's time, though, if maybe we started with me hearing from you. What do you want to know? What do you think you know but you're not sure about when it comes to head trauma, later life problems, moving beyond those questions, a lot of the stuff Nelson just focused on about right after that brain injury, but years, decades later, the worries you have, the things you've heard about, and this is whether you're someone who's had a brain injury or you work with people who've had a brain injury. I'm very curious to hear how this would be most beneficial for you all. So if anyone's willing to throw something out there, especially as we work on getting some slides up, that could be a good launching point for today. Great, so what is the connection between the head trauma and the later life dementia? Big topic, big question. And so maybe the first place I'll start is, I purposely use words like head trauma, which is vague and broad, because it actually encompasses a lot of different things. So most people in here, I think, have heard the term traumatic brain injury, or TBI, right? In the classic sense, especially in traditional neurological worlds, a TBI means you got hit in the head and you either lost consciousness, blacked out, or there was a period of time where your brain was not making memories. Our fancy term for that is post-traumatic amnesia, or PTA. And if you just ask a random sample of older adults if they've ever had something like that happen at any point in their life, pretty consistently about 25 to 30% of people will say they've had that happen to them. That's a big number. You have to ask the question the right way. If you ask someone, have you ever had a TBI, that number is much lower. If you ask them, have you ever got hit in the head and blacked out, that number goes up a little bit. Who here has had something like that happen? A traumatic brain injury where you either lost consciousness for however long or had that post-traumatic amnesia. Okay, keep your hands up for just a second if you don't mind. Who here has ever been hit in the head? Maybe you didn't lose consciousness, maybe you didn't have a period where your memory wasn't working, but you were very clearly dazed, you were feeling nauseous, you had a splitting headache, you were light sensitivity, very dizzy. Who's had something like that happen to them? Okay, as expected, more hands go up. We've loosened our definition a bit. This is the thing that happens most often in sports settings, military settings. The loss of consciousness piece, that's not as common in some of those settings. It can happen. All of that counts as a brain injury, by the way. So all those things don't count as head trauma exposure. Who here has ever played a contact or collision sport at any point in their life? Look at all these hands, great. Okay, so we've got anyone who maybe played American football, ice hockey, maybe you were a boxer. Even soccer falls under this now, depending on the level of play and whether or not you did a lot of heading drills and things like that. This is where a whole different type of head trauma comes in. The term that's used is something called subconcussive trauma. These are asymptomatic head impacts. Those are the repetitive things that happen over and over in these sports. Not ones that after you get hit, you've got these obvious symptoms. But the ones that are just routinely happening in the course of these sports. And these don't happen on the order of once or twice or three times. These are the ones that happen hundreds to thousands of times. And the term subconcussive is a little bit of a misnomer, because that word concussion literally just means your brain got hit and it got shaken up a little bit. And subconcussive to me would imply that you got hit and your brain didn't move. Well, your brain's moving every single time those impacts are happening, even if you don't have an obvious symptom as a result of it. So the first we're finally going to get to your question now. The first thing to ask is which of these types of head trauma increases this risk for later life problems? Is it all of them? And is it the same type of dementia that's the risk for all of these types of head trauma? And the short answer is we don't really have any clue, but the longer answer is we're getting a little bit closer to understanding what are these different pathways that take some, just some, not all people, from having that type of exposure to ultimately having problems later. And one of the reasons this gets really complicated is we're talking usually decades after that head trauma has occurred. And you just heard all the other things that impact how our brain works throughout our life and also increases risk for dementia later. And the further we get from that head injury, the harder and harder it gets to make a very confident conclusion that what I'm seeing now is because of that head trauma. So it gets a little complicated.